It's very pervasive in academia, especially that if you use 10% of a work, you are safe from infringing and from copyright infringement. And that is actually not the case. And it actually restricts faculty from what I've seen, because if faculty are really trying to be mindful and not infringe, and they're trying to whittle down their work to 10%, they're still not safe, and then you're hurting the pedagogy.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language,
University of Michigan Language Resource Center Director Julie Evershed shares the ins and outs of copyright and how it impacts language education.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. Today, Julie Evershed will go on a deep dive with us on copyright in the context of language teaching.
She recently gave a talk as part of our monthly LRC speaker series on this topic, which you can watch on our website.
Welcome to Speaking of Language, Julie.
Thank you for having me.
So, Julie, we are excited to continue our conversation about copyright basics, but before we get started, can you briefly introduce yourself for our listeners and share with us your background and your path with languages?
Sure. So I actually grew up in Ithaca.
Woohoo!
Yeah. And then decided to do my undergrad at the University of Michigan, where I majored in French language and literature. Wasn't too excited about the literature part, but I really loved the French language. Mm-hmm. And so I did the study abroad in Europe, loved study abroad.
Yeah.
And then after I graduated, I decided I wanted to go abroad again. So I went to Turkey for a year and a half. So I studied Turkish, basically learned what I call taxi cab Turkish, just to get around the city.
Yeah.
But came back and kind of slowly kept engaging with different languages and people from all over the world. And I went back to graduate school to get my degree in information and library science. And so this job opened up at the LRC in Michigan.
Yeah.
And it was like the perfect combination of everything I had been doing.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
Started working there. And the rest is history.
Yeah?
I've been there for 24 years now.
Wow. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So in your talk, you discuss different concepts related to copyright and how they affect instructors and language teachers in particular. But let's start with the basics and the term copyright. What does that mean?
So copyright is a series of rights given to authors and creators that protects their work, and it allows them to make money off their work and create more work. But it also gives them the confidence to put their work out into the public so that others can use their work and we can build societal knowledge. So the other half of copyright is the rights of the users, because if it's completely restricted to the authors, then how is it being disseminated?
Sure.
Right? So I think a lot of people don't understand that balance, because what we hear in the news is, lawsuits on infringement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You also talked about the work being a fixed work.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? What is a fixed work?
So when you put your idea, the expression of your idea, into any sort of medium, you write it down, you record it, you put it onto film, any way it can be displayed and disseminated. That is fixing the work in a medium. And so once it is fixed, then copyright automatically applies.
Okay. So is my shopping list copyrightable?
It is.
Look at that.
You should have some modicum of creativity, but one could argue that your shopping list has that. And what you want to do with that, that's up to you.
That is so interesting.
So the word, writing the word rutabaga on it does not give you copyright over the word rutabaga. But if you were to say, something fun and exciting about the manner and number of rutabagas you intended to to obtain, that's where that would come in. Am I following roughly?
Kind of. It could be the way you write it, your handwriting,
Got it.
your style, like however you're expressing rutabaga.
Yes.
That is what is copyrightable.
However you're expressing rutabaga, there we go.
And I think one thing that we do want to point out, anything that we are discussing today, nobody here in this room is a lawyer, right?
Correct.
So
This is not legal advice.
Yep, exactly. Full disclaimer here. We are not liable for anything.
It's how I go through life. So last week was Fair Use Week. Who knew? And you talked about, in your talk, the 4 criteria for fair use. Can you please recap those for us and maybe dispel a few common myths around fair use?
Sure. So fair use is an argument you construct as to why your use of any given work is fair and not infringing. And how you do that is you evaluate 4 factors: purpose, nature, amount, and effect. And then after you've weighed all those factors, you determine if your use is fair, or maybe you see it's maybe not so fair. It's more on the infringing end. So there's a lot of myths around fair use, such as I work in education, all my use is fair.
Yeah.
You really have to evaluate all 4 of the factors. Let's see, another myth is, the 10% rule. So that's
Right.
just a guideline, but it's very, very pervasive in academia, especially that if you use 10% of a work, you are safe from infringing and from copyright infringement. And that is actually not the case. It's not based in any legal precedent, and it actually restricts faculty from what I've seen, because if faculty are really trying to be mindful and not infringe, and they're trying to whittle down their work to 10%, they're still not safe, and then you're hurting the pedagogy, the
Sure.
instructional materials.
Yeah.
So, and you could use, 5% of a work, and if it's the heart of the work, you could be infringing. So it's really tricky.
Lots of considerations, yeah, lots of things to think about. Another concept that is of particular importance to language educators is the Berne Convention. Can you review that for us? What is it and what are the implications here?
Right. So that is an international treaty, and I read something recently like all but 2% of the countries in the world have signed on. So a majority of the current world countries are signatories. And the most important concept of this is national treatment. So that means that when a copyright protected material comes into a country, you will treat it within the copyright laws of that country. So we buy DVDs from all over the world.
Sure.
We have the teaching exemption, face-to-face teaching exemption. We can show those DVDs in class because we have that. Not all countries have that. So where it really impacts us is when we, as American, United States faculty, go abroad for conferences or teaching, and you have to realize you can't necessarily use the same media in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, that certainly is something that is important to think about, because that you might have to completely restructure a class.
Exactly.
that you developed with the American mindset in mind. Yeah, that's interesting.
Many of our colleagues have authentic materials that they purchased abroad that they would like to use in their classes. What are some things they should keep in mind when it comes to digitizing and sharing materials?
Right. So the first thing is that they need to have legal copies of the material. That's really the very first most important thing. And then when they bring it back to the States, of course, they can show it in their classroom. But when it comes to digitizing, they need to think about, are there digital rights that they need to purchase with that? Because that item might have a contractual North American distributor who holds those rights, or the filmmakers might still hold those rights. And because there has developed a market in digital streaming rights, that weighs against a fair use argument. So you really need to think about where those rights exist, how to obtain those rights. Your library can certainly help you with that. And then as far as sharing, just, the same as sharing materials that you would buy here.
So what about that awesome YouTube video that I found last night that I want to use in my teaching tomorrow? Can I simply show it? Can I download it? Can I include it in my Canvas course?
So the safest way to use it is just to link to it, because you're not copying it, and it's already, if infringement is happening, it's happening on YouTube and the person who uploaded it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't download it, although I know some people do download to protect it. We've had luck in the past when it's just individuals around the world just contacting them and say, is it all right if I download this video for use in my class? And we've even had people say, oh, sure, and here's a higher quality copy of the video,
nice, yeah.
which is nice. So usually if it's individuals working with each other, it's pretty easy to negotiate that. Where you could get into trouble is if it is an illegal upload. You don't really want to be using that for legal reasons, but also for ethical reasons, because you want to be, a role model for your students and how they should comport themselves when they graduate and they're more at risk for infringing behavior. The other risk is things get taken down. The owners will take them down.
Right.
And YouTube has, I think it's just an AI now that will shut things down or if something's reported. So, I have seen situations where someone checks their work, it's on YouTube, and 2 minutes later it's down and they can't do their presentation. And that's just really sad.
Yeah, absolutely. What about images that I find online? Can I throw those up in my classroom teaching presentations? What are best practices for that?
So images, again, it's best to link to images where you're finding your images. So there are repositories where you can get license-free images, such as Pixabay. Your university library might subscribe to image databases. There might be public domain images. You have to be careful with that, though, because if a professional photographer takes a picture of a public domain image, that photographer, that photo might have copyright protection.
Yeah.
So that gets a little tricky. The other tricky thing about adding images to your LMS is they are more easily downloadable by students. And part of the fair use is the protecting the work. So another practice that people recommend is either using a thumbnail and linking to a full size, or using a lower resolution image. And that works if you're not like art history, really studying the details.
Sure. Yeah.
What are the implications of teaching modality on copyright? So face-to-face language classes versus hybrid versus fully online classes. What should language educators keep in mind?
So for us as educators, whether we're teaching face-to-face or on Zoom or asynchronously online, we're just teaching, right? It's not, much different, but the law treats the modalities different. So we've got the face-to-face teaching exemption in the United States. Hybrid presents different challenges with regards to copyright, and fully online is not, or has not been in the past, recognized as a face-to-face class, even if it's synchronous, even with the Teach Act, because the law just cannot keep up with technology.
Sure.
And these days, we can barely keep up with technology, right?
Oh, absolutely.
With AI coming in. So just be mindful that different modalities have different requirements and legal issues, and hopefully your institution can help you navigate that. The one interesting thing about the pandemic was because we were all, shut down and at home, a bunch of legal experts wrote an open letter stating that showing a movie via Zoom in your class is fair use. We consider this fair use because of the current situation.
Of course, yeah.
And so it's been interesting to see, how many things we adapt that worked well for us during the pandemic, how many things we want to continue on. And of course, as librarians and educators, we want that to continue, but I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah. You just mentioned AI, so of course that's been something that's been on people's minds. The impacts of generative AI on copyright and what we can and cannot use. In your talk, you mentioned works created by non-humans and that those are in the public domain. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe reference that wonderful example of that picture that you showed in your talk?
Yes. So I'm sure many of our listeners have seen the monkey selfie, where a photographer left his camera out, the monkey picked it up and took this amazing selfie, and he put it online. It went viral, and then there was a court case, like, who has the copyright over this image? And it was determined that works created by non-human authors are public domain. And I believe this came out even before all the ChatGPT
That's right. Yep.
hullabaloo. So yeah, using ChatGPT, it's still kind of the Wild West, just like it was for video streaming 10, 15 years ago. We're all trying to navigate this and figure this out. But what we do know is there are ethical considerations as well as legal considerations. So if ChatGPT creates text for you and you edit that text, that could be considered your
It becomes
copyright.
human then.
Right, right. But just the text generated from the algorithm is not copyright protected. There's a huge controversy in the art world because some of these training algorithms are using actual artwork that people have put online, but they have not given their permission. And so if you want, a Warhol, your dog in the image of a Warhol, that, they might consider that infringing because that, his works are still under copyright and you scraped them from the web. And so there's this argument by the tech people doing the algorithms that, no, it's on the web, we can use it. And the artist saying, you're really impacting our career and our artistic creativity with this. So it's going to be really interesting to keep our eyes on that and see how that shakes out because you can definitely see both sides of that issue.
Yeah. Interesting.
So what happens if I infringe a copyright? Will I go to jail, be fined millions of dollars? Will an angry member of Metallica show up at my door? What do I need to worry about?
Depends on what you're doing, Sam.
Yeah.
I think for most of us, when we're using items within the context of our class, when we're using digital items, most likely the worst that's going to happen is a takedown notice. And you'll just get an official notice saying, stop.
Yeah.
And then you stop. If you feel really strongly, I would suggest you consult an expert and, figure out, do I have a fight here? Do I want that fight? Do I have a fight? Because it is important when we believe we are in the right to kind of push that so that our user rights are not trampled. And a lot of our work is very temporal, right? So it's very easy to take down, it's gone. But if you publish it in a book, if you put it on TV, then even if you take it down, it still exists.
Yeah.
So then there might be larger issues such as fines. I don't know how many people have actually gone to jail, but definitely the financial situation can be
Interesting.
difficult, yeah.
Where do I start when I want to figure out if I can use certain material, especially for my teaching? What are some guidelines?
Right. So at the University of Michigan, my colleagues in the Copyright Office, and they may have gotten this somewhere else, I'm not sure, have developed a framework to evaluate. So there are several questions you can ask.
Nice.
And as you work through those questions, it gives you a better idea of where you're at. So the first is when you're looking at an item, is it protected by copyright? And if so, by whom? And that can determine your next step. Does a license exist for your particular use? And these days, our academic libraries have wonderful access to amazing platforms that give us access to movies and images and music. There's also Creative Commons that you can just go look for things out in the open. If you have an idea, it really is best to look for those open educational resources, those with Creative Commons license. For languages, we've got wonderful national foreign language centers, Coral, and the University of Kansas has the National Foreign Language Resource Center on OER. Those are great places to start because then you know the terms of how you can use that. The next question to ask is, are there user rights that exist, that exemptions that will allow me to do what I want to do? And, if you're coming up negative on all of those, maybe think about an alternative work. Is there something else that will serve the same purpose that doesn't have the same protection? And it never hurts to ask for permission. And sometimes people say no, but a lot of times people say yes, especially if it's individuals who have a blog or a video on YouTube. They're just happy that people are listening and watching, and they're really flattered that you want to use this in an educational setting.
Terrific. So what are some of the considerations for authors and creators, including instructors, in protecting their own work?
That's a great question and one we often don't think about. I think the first thing to do is look at your institutional policies. What does your institution say about your intellectual property? And you have to look at it from your role as a faculty member or a student or a staff member. If you are hired for a particular purpose, your employer will, if you're work for hire, the employer will hold the copyright. If you collaborate with multiple authors, you hold joint copyright, and that's another situation that you'd have to consider. What we talked about earlier, if you're using content that is already copyright protected, you need to get the rights for that. And more often than not, actually, I've never seen a case where a publisher has not asked for proof of permission when you're using copyright protected. So they're all over that. But the funny thing is that then they want you to sign the contract when you're potentially signing your rights away to them.
I know.
So it's really important for any grant-funded project contracts, any contracts that you sign, it's super important that you read the terms and understand the terms. And if you don't understand the terms, try and find somebody to assist you. Librarians are a great first step. Some of them even specialize this and can walk you through the different terms and conditions of a contract. I know the University of Michigan research guide actually has alternate text that you can add into a contract so that you're not signing away exclusive rights. And so they're getting into the nitty-gritty of the legalities, and they can help you negotiate that.
Well, this reminds me of privacy statements that we always agree to willy-nilly anytime you go on a new website or you try a new online resource. I don't think I have once in my life actually read something and
I imagine if I found out that Apple had the rights to one of my kidneys at this point, that would not surprise me.
Yeah, and they use that user interface to their advantage, right? Really small text, really small box, making you scroll through all this language.
Yeah, that's crazy. So you referenced some of the resources that sit on the Michigan website. Where are other places where our listeners can learn more about all these things? Any other online resources that you can recommend?
So I did put a list of resources in a document attached to my slide deck, so people can definitely check that out. Cornell actually has a wonderful LibGuide on copyright and public domain. I knew about the public domain, but I didn't know the rest of it. So libraries in general have pretty authoritative information around copyright, as do some law firms. So when you're Googling, I think look to those sources to find out more. And just keep your eyes open. Like, we all know that Mickey Mouse went into public domain in January, right? Read up about it and, kind of find out why is this a big deal? What's happening here? There's so much out there around copyright. I think what I did was I found a mentor who's an expert, who's actually in our copyright office, and I just follow her. I take workshops from her. So if you find someone either online or locally who really does know a lot and is an expert, just, keep an eye on them and see
Yeah.
what workshops they're doing and
Great.
articles they're writing.
Terrific. So you've been so generous in sharing all this knowledge with us and answering all these questions. So we would love to know what is happening at your LRC. What's going on at your language center?
So post-pandemic, we realized students were all coming in with their laptops, and they're pushing. We had a lot of just a bank of computing stations, and they're pushing aside the keyboard. So 2 summers ago, I removed 24 computing stations in my center and just put in tables and chairs. And the center is so alive right now. Students are just coming in, and they're studying, and they're meeting up with friends, and we've got conversation hours happening there, like a lot of activity we weren't having before because it was, such a formal lab type setting. And because of the flexibility of that space, we're also working more with language programs on doing co-curricular events. So 2 weeks ago, we had a Lunar New Year event. We're doing a South Asian New Year event. We do game nights with different language programs.
Nice.
We collect games, and we're actually collecting video games and digital games to encourage students especially, to come in and just have fun with their language.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. And then we've got our translation initiatives. We have our annual Translate-a-thon, which has been ongoing for the past 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so really thinking about what more can we do in the realm of translation.
That's great. Well, it sounds like you know how to keep yourself busy.
Yes.
Julie, this was all so wonderful. Thank you for taking the time. This copyright is such an important piece that I think oftentimes we tend to forget to think about, both from the user and the creator perspective. So thank you for shedding light on all of this. Before we sign off, we would like to ask you to share a word in a language you speak, you love, you are learning, you may want to learn, that doesn't exist in English, but you wish it did. What is that word for you?
That word would be, and I'm not sure I'm saying it right because I've never heard it, komorebi, which is Japanese.
Okay.
And it means the light as it filters through the leaves on the tree.
Oh.
And it's just such a wonderful image. It always makes me just kind of breathe a little deeper and imagine that, in my hikes and my walks, imagine, that vision. So that's a word I wish we had.
Yeah.
Nice. I like that.
Very poetic and evocative.
Yeah,
I like
yeah,
that
yeah.
a lot. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for speaking of language with us today, Julie.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure working with you all.
Join us next week to hear from Juliana Torres about her exploration of forms of monstrosity from a queer perspective in a selection of 20th century Latin American women writers.
Until then,
Auf Wiederhören!
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu.
and follow Cornell LRC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelika Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.
If they want to steal Metallica's music instead of hiding behind their computers in their bedrooms and dorm rooms, then just go down to Tower Records and grab them off the shelves instead.